Thank you, Pamela and Josh, for doing this podcast. We're going to be covering a lot around Red Plus and biodiversity. What is a Red Plus project, the theory and impact, and also basically trying to decipher some of the misconceptions and the facts and what is it actually investing in high impact solution to deforestation. So briefly, for those who are not familiar with either of you, you both have an extensive background, and I always prefer people to kind of give a little bit of background themselves, even though they can see it on the text that we post. So starting with you, Pamela, just briefly, you're, according to the bio, you're one of the co-founders of Everland. Oh, I think you're on mute. Okay.
Sorry. Firstly, thank you so much for having us both on the podcast. I have been listening to a few of your episodes over the last few weeks, and actually I listen to loads of podcasts. I'm a pro, so I really enjoyed listening to a few of them, and I'm really happy to be here. Yes, so I'm Pamela. I'm based in Brighton in the UK. I became Everland's president in 2023, actually kind of pretty much this time last year. Yeah, you're right. Along with Gerald Perlman, our founder and executive chairman, I co-founded Everland back in 2017. And up until I became president, I was very focused on business development, so selling the credits from the projects that we represent. And prior to that, I worked with Gerald at Wildlife Works, again in business development.
But your background was finance. Correct me if I'm
wrong.
Yeah,
so I worked for the first 4 years of professional life at BNP Paribas, and that was where I first encountered the whole carbon world.
Okay. In full disclosure, I was on the advisory board of BNP Paribas when they took over Fortis.
I remember that moment. Yeah. And nothing to do with me. No,
I know
I
it was an interesting experience. It was a very different culture when BNP took over Fortis. Okay, Josh, for those who are not, you're the nerd of the three of us, I think, or you're atmospheric scientist. Can you fill in some more of the blanks?
I think real scientists would take great umbrage with slapping me with the name of science. I'm a wannabe scientist. I do have an atmospheric science background. Yes, I've been in the world of environmental science and so forth for a long time, and it's good to see you, Robert. Thanks for having us on today. Good to be with you, Pamela, as always. We spend most of our days together. Yeah. I've been in professional life for 30 years in the field of sustainability, but always straddling the world of markets and change. So I've always, my obsession in professional life has been using the power of markets to drive positive change at scale. That's really been the story of my professional journey. I have been an entrepreneur. I started and ran a hydrogen fuel cell manufacturing business many years ago that actually we took to the NASDAQ. So I've been involved in NASDAQ listed company management. But for a lot of my career, most of my career, I was in sustainable energy. I have been in sustainable agriculture and forestry. I was the senior vice president of an organization called Rainforest Alliance, which works with a lot of consumer-facing brands in food and agriculture to scale best practices, sustainable best practices worldwide in ag value chains around the world. And as part of that work, I got very involved in Red Plus because of that organization was very involved in the early years of Red Plus. And that's how I came to meet Gerald along the way when I was in a different organization. And I had not left Rainforest Alliance very long when Gerald knocked on my door, and we started talking about my joining Everland, and I came to the company in 2019.
Okay, so for those who are not familiar with RED plus, REDD plus. What does the acronym stand for first, and what is RED plus projects? What are they?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, we're going to try to have this conversation liberated from the shackles of jargon. So that's the first bit of jargon. REDD, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And the plus is about all of the community and biodiversity benefits that ride along with the work to reduce emissions from forest loss. A lot of people in our world of carbon crediting call these co-benefits. Like, these are things that happen alongside this work to reduce emissions from forest loss. But the most important thing to understand first is that they don't come along or after as an afterthought. The delivery of community benefits and benefits to forest stakeholders comes before the emissions reductions. And the reason why, and why this is also important, just to kind of level everybody up, forest loss is one of the largest contributor to climate change that we have. It's right up there with fossil fuels. In fact, forest loss is, I think, 3 or 4 times larger as a source of carbon emissions than all of air travel and transport. So the entire aviation sector is much smaller than the emissions from forest loss. So categorically, as a source of emissions, it kind of stands alone next to the fossil fuels. And it's driven by what? Like, why do people cut down trees? Nobody cuts down a tree because it hates a tree. Nobody dislikes trees. People cut trees down so that they can earn money from the sale of the tree, and more importantly, from what they can do on the land where the tree was standing. So whether it's to grow oil palm or coffee or cocoa or soy, or to raise cattle or whatever, or to mine, people cut forests down for economics because they can make more money from the forest being cut down than from the forest standing. And that's essentially the root of the problem. It's economics. And so if you want to reduce forest loss and all the climate change emissions that come from it, you have to create value for the forest in its standing state and make sure that that value is realized by the people who have a say in what's going to happen in the forest. That might be the government, some combination of the government that sets policies that might favor or disfavor forest conversion. And of course, the communities, all the people who are living on the forest frontier, including indigenous communities, who have a choice in what to do. And in fact, they don't have many options available to them. And so if you really care about conservation, you got to make it economically viable. And that, in a nutshell, is what the RED plus mechanism does. And we can talk a little bit about that right now. But fundamentally, what is a RED plus project? It's a project that brings together all of the forest stakeholders, communities and governments, and often bound together or stitched together by a specialized project developer. They all come together to transform the drivers of forest loss in that landscape and turn them into long-term durable incentives for forest conservation. That's what a RED Plus project is.
Okay, so Pamela, how does a RED Plus project become accepted as a RED Plus project? What are the criteria that it needs to do to be able to call itself RED Plus? Like the details.
Yeah, sure. So a project is, I'm really sorry, but I'm extremely nervous. I know you're recording this and you're going to edit it later. I'm just really nervous.
We're all friends here. There's nothing
No,
to
I
be
know,
nervous.
Yeah, I'm actually, is it okay if Josh takes this and I try and I just chill
Yeah,
out a little
sure.
bit.
That's no problem. That's no problem. I just don't want people complaining, hey, why didn't you ask Pamela anything?
No one will think that. I have had a chat with Josh about this before about feeling about this kind of thing. So I will jump
Okay,
in and
so
calm down.
Josh, when does a Red Plus project become accepted as a Red Plus project? And Pamela, I'll get back to you about what are the financial benefits for institutional investors from a Red Plus project, as well as for the community.
Sure.
Yeah. So the concept of an official Red Plus project, to introduce that, first you have to understand what the voluntary carbon market is and how it works. We'll answer the question in the context of that. And so we obviously have this huge problem of climate change emissions, and we've got this lingering problem that the governments of the world aren't getting their act together fast enough. Meanwhile, Rome is burning and we've got to reduce emissions any which way we can. The most of the largest, heaviest emitting companies in the world have stepped forward and made public facing, time-bound, specific commitments to reduce on a voluntary basis their own carbon emissions from their own value chains, and also to take responsibility for the carbon emissions that are associated with their work that are outside of their specific activities and value chains, okay? The so-called scope 3 emissions. Again, we're going to try to avoid the jargon. And so companies are trying very hard. Most of those companies are working very hard to reduce their emissions from their own operations, but especially in heavy industry and in the fossil fuel sectors, petrochemicals, aviation. It's going to take a long time before the infrastructure, the entire infrastructure, changes to something that's really low emission or no fossil fuels and totally renewable, or electrification, what have you. It's going to take decades for that. In the meantime, you have problems like forest loss still lingering. And so the voluntary carbon market is just a mechanism by which companies are saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and invest in delivering emissions reductions outside of our own scope of work, because we want to do it, because it's the right thing to do, and because it's going to take us such a long time, even with lots of investment made, okay, to achieve significant emissions reductions from our own operations. That's the voluntary carbon market in a nutshell. And so the concept of it is that you can earn a carbon credit. You can stimulate an emission reduction happening elsewhere by buying a credit, okay? And so a credit is generated in different sectors in different ways. How do you generate a carbon credit from a red project? Well, let's go over to any country that you want that's experiencing high forest loss, like Cambodia is a great example. They've lost about 1/3 of their forest over the past 10 plus years, something like that. It's a huge amount of forest loss that they've had. So if you go down to the ground, say 10 years ago in Cambodia, right? And you just ask the question, what's going to happen here in this area? Here's a national park in Cambodia, nice, beautiful, protected area. If nothing is done, if everything remains in business as usual, here's what this likely scenario of forest loss is going to be over the next 10 years, right? And you, at the beginning of a RED project, you get together with your stakeholders and you utilize scientific methodologies that have been developed by an independent market standard. It's called the Verified Carbon Standard, and that is currently the most important voluntary market standard through which projects get themselves registered, validated, and verified to issue these carbon credits. So a project will come together and utilize the methodology under the guise of the standard to work out what that baseline or business as usual scenario would have been. Here's how much forest would have been lost, and here's how much emissions would have been generated under that business as usual scenario. And so you have to, once you've created that scenario, once you've set the project up, you have to submit the project for an independent third-party validation to assure that it conforms with the rules of the standard. And that involves an extensive third-party independent audit by an independent audit firm that has been accredited by one of the international accreditation bodies to go ahead and make an audit of this type of a project. So at the beginning of the project, you get your project validated. Yes, you've created that baseline scenario correctly. You've worked with the stakeholders in the right way and so forth. Now you have a validated project. And you go ahead and you perform. You do the things that you think are necessary under your so-called theory of change. The theory of change is, how are we going to take this mess in the landscape and turn it into success over time? That's the theory of change. And there are all the activities that we're going to undertake to deliver value for the forest stakeholders. A year goes by, 2 years go by. Here's what the actual forest loss has been and the actual emissions. And you compare that actual situation with the business as usual, what would have been. And the difference between business as usual and actual is the carbon credit that you earn. That's how you generate a carbon credit. That has to be verified, again, through independent audit. You do scientific monitoring of the forest loss in your landscape, and you have all of that monitoring reviewed independently by an auditor. And then the auditor says, yep, that's right. Once that audit report has been finalized and accepted by the standard, you're done. You have verified a certain amount of emissions reductions, and then you can sell that performance that you have achieved on the voluntary carbon market. And a buyer then can utilize that carbon credit to make a claim about the work that they've done, about the impact of their investment on emissions.
Okay, so you've created a credit that's verified, third party, and now you want to offer that to institutional investors or corporates to offset their emissions. So what is that process like, Pamela?
I mean, what a question. And I'm wondering if I can answer it in today's world, or I think maybe, I don't know, I mean, maybe it would be useful just to go back a little bit and then we could end up with the inception of Everland. I think just because I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, I focused on business development for so long, and that world has changed vastly from, you know, when I first met Wildlife Works back in 2012 to how we operate now. I think just before I do that, just to build on what Josh was saying, and what you asked before about why someone would buy a credit, they just make a little nuance between primary and secondary market. You know, someone could, a company can buy the credits on what we'd call the primary market, so for their own use, and then they retire those credits, they're taken out of circulation. Josh mentioned making a claim that can be a public, like very loud and proud claim, or it can be totally private, it's completely up to them. And then equally you get the secondary market, where you'll get someone in more of an intermediary or investor role buying the credits and then selling them onwards. They might be buying them hoping that the value will go up and so that they can sell them to a buyer in the future. Or you might get a kind of more of an intermediary who buys them on a back-to-back basis. You know, we operate in the primary market really as Everland because we represent project developers directly, but having the secondary market is equally important for a healthy, growing voluntary carbon market, and we sell to both types of buyers.
And how long a period of time does a primary market buyer commit? I mean, how long are the credits, you know, 100 years, or are they like 20 years or 10 years?
Yeah, okay. So from the project point of view, the credits are referred to in vintages. So which year the emission reduction took place in. So you'll get the credit will have what we call a vintage.
Okay.
From the buyer's point of view, they can make, I mean, it really, like, we're really operating in the voluntary carbon market. A buyer doesn't have to do anything full stop, let alone commit for a minimum amount of years. You'll get buyers who want to buy on what we call a spot basis. So, you know, they'll come to us asking for one particular volume of credits from one particular project that they want right now. And then you'll get buyers who want to commit for a certain number of years, generally because they want to fix their costs. It makes sense for them, and it works really well for the project because they know that, say, their costs are covered or a portion of their costs are covered. So, really, yeah, okay, of course, there are trends. Like, very big buyers generally prefer to fix their costs for a while because so that they're not exposed too much to price fluctuations. But really, it completely depends on what the buyer, what the company's objectives are for the credits that they're buying.
And the next question is regarding how Everland kind of got started. But what is the benefit in the short term for the local community in, not cutting down the trees for charcoal or tables? Are they benefiting financially from the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, this is the most important thing, and it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning. If a red project is not meaningfully addressing social and economic livelihood needs and aspirations of the communities, it is not going to be an effective project because the pressure that's being put on the forest is being driven by mostly
Okay.
people and their economic needs. And so it's all about the use of proceeds and what we call the revenue sharing or benefit sharing model of the project. Now, there in fact are no specific prescriptive standards in the marketplace for what those kinds of revenue sharing arrangements ought to be. And actually, we think that that's a weakness in the market. And so one of the things at Everland that's really important for us, and it's part of our own diligence criteria, and Pamela will talk to you a little more about our model and how we partner with projects and project developers. But one really critical element of it is what are the nature of the agreements and the revenue sharing with communities. And so on our side, we require that projects have very generous direct revenue sharing with communities, in addition to having, very thoughtful books of activities, suites of activities that are developed in partnership with communities that focus entirely on things that they need and value that can be created in lieu of cutting down the forest. So, we can talk about lots and lots of examples from projects all over the world, but they, usually involve a combination of providing basic social services that are totally lacking. We're talking about, like, it's kind of hard to get your mind around the places that we're talking about. These are like incredibly remote forest communities that are like forgotten by governments. Nobody cares. There's no infrastructure. Often there's no roads or very little, no power. There's no schools, or the schools are terrible. There's no hospitals, or the hospitals are terrible. There's no doctors, no teachers. It's water, basic stuff like meals for kids. There's all of that. And then there's the livelihood aspect of it. So these projects, and we can talk all day, and let's get to that. That is the whole thing with the project. It's the unbelievable transformative social and economic benefits that they provide to these places that otherwise wouldn't get a sniff at this kind of thing.
Yeah, before I jump to Pamela, I just want to share a story in that vein. A friend of mine, he's the largest organic rice producer in Southeast Asia, and he said to me, I have a solution for the rice field burnings. He says, oh, really? And I asked him, and he told me, do you know why they burn the rice fields? He said, because they're poor, and it costs money to take away the rice and the biomass. They have to rent a tractor. I mean, they're really poor. So he's taking away the biomass and giving the rice back to the farmer and converting that biomass to something that can be used to replace single-use plastic. So sometimes it's very hard to really fathom the
Right.
scale of the
It is.
poverty. Is like, dude, we're talking about, there's nothing here. There is no 7-Eleven.
Mm.
There's no supermarkets over here. There's no schools or hospital, and you're going into these places to try to help these communities. So how did this whole Everland story start? I
Sure.
mean, this Jewish guy from New York decides to put on some hiking boots and go into the forest with a machete, and you're kind of tagging along with him behind. How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, not quite that. There's an element of truth, but and firstly, thank you so much for letting me tell this story. It's a huge part of my life. I think if you'll indulge me just to go back a little bit to when Gerald
Sure.
and I first met, because it is I mean, I think it's interesting, but also it's more relevantly all the work that we did together back in the day has really influenced how we look at life today and how we built Everland. So going back, I guess, to 2008, when I was working, as I said, at BNP Paribas, I was part of the commodity derivatives team. So commodity derivatives, that's primarily oil trading, also gas and power, metals, and it also housed what was the relatively new carbon team at the time. I was pretty junior. I was working in marketing. I was helping all the salespeople communicate better with their clients, like working on their presentations, websites, that kind of thing. And it was really nice because you would work on one hand with a very specialized trader right through to the whole the BNP Paribas global brand team. So it was quite a cool exposure to such a big company. And then in 2010, the carbon team, they did a deal with Wildlife Works, who I mentioned at the beginning. So Wildlife Works are a REDD+ project developer, and the agreement involved BNP Paribas. Part of the agreement, they would buy credits from the Wildlife Works Kazagao Corridor project in Kenya for a period of 5 years. And, if I did a 5-year deal now, today, all these years later, like that would be really cool. But at the time, back in 2010, I mean, it was a really remarkable moment. Like it was pretty pivotal for the VCM, for the voluntary carbon market. It got a lot of attention externally, but also internally within the bank. And then I'd say, maybe not as important, but to me, equally important is that I helped with the press release for that deal, and I got to meet Gerald Perlman, who, as we say, eventually became the founder of Everland. So at the time, he was head of business development for Wildlife Works. And with Wildlife Works, I really got to see this organization where they were developing these conservation initiatives that obviously are driving environmental change, social benefits, but at the same time, they were generating financial returns. And I just had this really, it was really for the first time that I'd met anyone who was an impact venture entrepreneur, like a mission-driven business person. I definitely didn't kind of grow up in a space with that type of role model. I think about when I was young, all my parents, neighbors, etc., they were all going down the path of, my role models were lawyers, doctor types, and I thought, that's what you do. You join a really big organization, work your way up, nice stable career. I mean, it sounds great, but I mean, it was definitely the path I looked at, really. And meeting Wildlife Works, it was just the first time that I saw an organization and a model where business expertise and social impact, they weren't these opposing forces. Like, on the contrary, they're very, very complementary goals that go very well together. I then, through Gerald, just meeting him while I was still at BNP Paribas, got to meet Mike Korczynski, who is the founder of Wildlife Works. I feel like you know him already.
Yes.
And, you know, with both of them, there are a lot of characteristics that are very well known about entrepreneurs and founders. And, you know, there's a lot of lists. But I think for me, the thing that really stuck with me was, you know, our space back then was really very nascent. Like there wasn't this demand for the credits that they were selling yet, but they weren't kind of wasting time fretting about the future. You know, they planned that the market would arrive. They were getting ready for it. They were putting their energy into its arrival and being ready for that. And again, like just seeing people with this real clarity of purpose, like faith in themselves, you know, faith in their product. Again, like it was just incredible to meet entrepreneurs with that type of characteristic. So yeah, as I say, in 2012, in 2012, really inspired by meeting both Mike and Gerald, I was lucky enough to join Wildlife Works to cover business development in Europe. So selling the credits that were generated by Wildlife Works projects to European companies. And yeah, so I mean, from 2012 to how long was it? I guess for a couple of years, we were representing first of all the Kasagawa corridor project that I mentioned in Kenya. And then a couple of months after I joined, at the end of that year, Wildlife Works had their Mine Dombe project in the DRC verified, and our job as a business development team was to sell the credits from those two projects. I cannot emphasize enough just how different the market was then. Like obviously the size was different, you know, there were way fewer credits being sold. But just in general, you know, there were just fewer people in our space. Like we didn't have all those ratings agencies, all those kind of support services. There wasn't this kind of frantic media coverage that I'm sure we'll get onto. You know, there weren't all these trading platforms and conferences. And generally, all project developers found selling their credits difficult. I mean, we were and are
they
selling.
didn't give you a big hug? All these.
They sometimes gave us a hug. Yeah, no, we got a lot of hugs. I mean, no, for sure, we would always get a nice reception. Like, yeah, we would get hugs. People would be really moved by our story. I mean, how can they not be? You know, and we felt the story so much. But same as today, they were buying something that they didn't have to buy. I mean, it's literally a voluntary purchase, and it's not an easy sell, you know. And I'm not for a second saying that we found it easy, absolutely not, but we were able to sell enough credits to keep Wildlife Works and their projects going. There are a few reasons why. First of all, they're brilliant projects. You know, Kasagawa was the first project to be verified and to have credits available for sale. It's really a landmark project for the world, and Wildlife Works has a really established track record of excellent project development. You know, secondly, we were purely focused on sales. You know, like when we talk about these projects, they're conservation enterprises, right? Like you have to have people who are purely focused on the money side of things. And Mike and Gerald and everyone at Wildlife Works, they recognize that, you know, you need a sales team full stop, and you need them to be completely focused on sales. They can't be doing a little bit of sales and a little bit of that, you know. And lastly, I'd say we were doubly motivated. So what do I mean by that? Of course, with salespeople, we had that classic sell, like the desire to succeed, obviously, like in our heads, but we also had and have it deeply in our hearts, and that makes an incredible difference. We became extremely connected to the projects that we represent. We would visit, which is obviously the best way to learn with a project. We would build these working relationships, and friendships with everyone who worked on the ground. And we just became extremely aware of how vital it was that we sold these credits. We felt that, we still feel that responsibility. I mean, we always tell the same story, that going to visit a project is amazing. I grew up, barely left West London until I was 25, and suddenly we're visiting Kenya and Cambodia, and it's an amazing privilege to do that. But you will also leave with quite a heavy heart, knowing that you're the link between people who, as you've both discussed, have really very little, and then decision makers in the boardrooms of New York and London who have the capacity to buy huge amount of credits and really channel life-changing amounts of money through to the communities in these areas.
The one thing that struck me a lot about Mike and Gerald is that they were as I like to say, they're authentic eccentrics. So they, and they were, and he also, Gerald was very honest. I was approached by one of the largest biodiversity project, wanted to do 15 million hectares. I mean, and well-funded, all the money. But they thought they're going to be super rich with carbon credits, and they didn't know anything about carbon credits. So I said, let's speak to Gerald, and I introduced him to a few others. Gerald was the only one that gave them an honest, no bullshit answer and a price, where everyone says, oh, I can get you, 10 times that, this Canadian one and the one. And they were, my friend or client was very disappointed with Gerald's price. But in the end, Gerald was the one who was the most accurate. So, Josh, in your eyes, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the present voluntary emission rights around REDD+ that you feel should be improved or addressed, or there are no problems?
Well, that's a loaded question. Show me something without problems, and I'll show you, the best dream you've ever had. Yeah. So I think the most important thing about REDD that remains true today is that it is the only mechanism that we have to put economic value on a standing tree in a threatened forest. And so if you're thinking about back to the thing that we've been speaking about from the beginning of this conversation, it's like, it works. It really works. It has been shown to work. Plenty of science, hundreds and hundreds of independent third-party audits and audit reports, unbelievable levels of transparency. It works. It's generated huge amounts of emissions reductions and saved forests that would have been lost. So what does it have going for it? It's the only thing we got, and it's really good. And it's shown the ability, most important, to scale. So if you saw the growth in the market, sort of in 2021 and 22, things moved from the era that, as Pamela said, the nascent era where Wildlife Works was getting started, and a few other project developers and conservation organizations. They're specialized companies like Wildlife Works, but mostly, especially in the earlier years, it was Rainforest Alliance, Wildlife Conservation Society, very well-known, premier conservation organizations doing this work. And then all of a sudden, the dream came true and things scaled up. And if you project out that rate of growth, that kind of a growth, and push it forward 10 years or so, you're looking at the mechanism emerging into a level and a scale where you're like, okay, this starts to look like a quantitatively meaningful bite of the problem of forest loss. And so that's the most important thing that REDD has going for it. It's a legitimate, real solution.
So it's quite idiot proof.
Well, no, not in the least. It's not idiot proof at all. It requires unbelievable levels of expertise of many different kinds. Fundamentally, it requires the expertise to be on the ground with a very diverse group of people in a very complicated mess of a situation and change it. That's really hard. And there's not a formula. There are principles. There are design principles, implementation principles, but there's not a formula, which makes it particularly hard. Things resolve to a unit, which is the carbon credit, but what's behind that, while there are consistent principles, it just looks different everywhere, even inside of a particular country. So no, it's the farthest thing from idiot proof at all. It takes unbelievable amounts of skill and expertise, particularly the capacity to make incredible partnerships, because people always talk about public-private partnerships, multi-stakeholder, but like that's what this work really is. It's different kinds of organizations owning different pieces of the work really, really well, and doing it though in a real collective effort that links all the way out to the market, which is our function in it. So no, it's not easy. It's really, really hard, but that's especially why it's noteworthy that the scale, in the face of the complexity and the difficulty, the fact that it showed the capacity to scale is what's so important. So you asked what's broken with the mechanism,
or what can be improved,
and what can be improved. So we touched on this a little bit earlier. Fundamentally, the thing that I think both can be improved and must be improved is a much stronger set of standards and transparency around how projects are designed and developed in partnership with communities, and what the nature of the benefit sharing is with those communities. Because the foundation of the change agenda for a RED project, because a RED project is a change agenda, the foundation of the change agenda has to be equitable, just partnerships with forest stakeholders on the ground that are born of true, free, prior, informed, and ongoing consent by those communities, so that the whole effort is co-designed, co-owned by the communities from the start. It's most important. And right now, what I think is fair to say is that the standards that currently exist, the current offerings in the marketplace, the verified carbon standard, the VCS that we mentioned before, does not really speak to this in the way that is needed for really good, durable change to happen on the ground. And then also to provide the understanding and depth of understanding of impact on the one hand, and then if you flip it over, the reputational risk protection that the clients need to make sure that the purchases that they're making translate into good, solid work on the ground.
I don't know if either of you ever heard of Professor Ratan Lal. So he's like should be like a Nobel Prize winning soil scientist. He was the mentor of Al Gore. So I'll send you a short clip. He and his nerdy professors around the world have calculated if you restore the health of the soil and the vegetation, forget about blue carbon, you can draw down 330 gigatons. That's a lot. That's quite a lot of CO2 if you just restore and maintain the vegetation, which is basically what RED Plus, is about. Yet all the money seems to be going into nonsensical things like dry air capture, which is taking a shot glass to the Pacific Ocean and say you're going to move it. How do you break that focus when your system works, it's scalable, it helps the community, it improves lives, it addresses climate, it makes money for some people? Why isn't it getting, a tsunami of money?
Okay, I can attempt to answer that. I just for the sake of building just for a second on what Josh was saying and what you were saying, Robert, about the benefit sharing. It is kind of funny that it isn't more fundamentally part of the standards, because it's what everyone wants to know. I mean, if you're everyone who buys a credit, and really, like, I just tell you anecdotally, like, whether they're spending, you know, $10,000 or less, or whether they're a massive buyer, they all want to know where their cash is going, which kind of seems pretty obvious. So it is strange that it's not part of it's not kind of more you know, project developers aren't required to be more transparent about it. In terms of, you know, the broader market and you know, your question on where the attention goes, I would just say that personally, for me, like, it's not about competing with other projects or other mechanisms. I mean, the our not just our VCM world, but the climate change space has so much infighting and competitiveness anyway. I mean, of all things that don't need that, surely it's addressing climate change. Like, surely it should be a really collective effort. I just for us personally, we made a really conscious decision to be really, really focused on one thing, which is selling and marketing the credits from Red Plus projects. And there are a lot of other organizations in our space that are a lot more broad. You know, they'll offer the whole range of credits, renewable energy credits, like the technology that you mentioned, cook stoves, etc. And for sure, there's absolutely a space for them, but we feel that we're most valuable in a place where we can know something really, really well and be super focused on that. I mean, the main reason why is we believe in the effectiveness of the Red Plus mechanism. Like, we know that it delivers these high quality community centered projects, and we know that they make a difference in terms of forest protection and wildlife preservation. And we feel like our efforts as a group of people, you know, we're not a massive team, but we feel that our efforts are best placed in this one particular place, which is providing project developers with financial stability so that they can get on with their role, which is change making on the ground. So, I mean, I don't know if that kind of vaguely answered your question. I can't speak for why someone would choose to invest in one place over another, or buy credits from one project over another. All I know is that what we want to be the place that they come to when they're looking at Red Plus, and we've built the company very intentionally around the buyers that absolutely do believe in the mechanism and do see how valuable it is.
There's been quite a bit of publicity, positive, negative, in the press, particularly the Guardian article about, you know, all Red Plus projects, you know, are fraud. The Dutch organization Follow the Money did that. I actually met with them, and they had a preconditioned attitude that basically it's all fraud, and basically TCX and all these guys are just cowboys and hustlers, and they're not doing anything about climate. Why do you think the media, or some of the media, is so hung up or so aggressively going after Red Plus?
Okay, Josh is going to answer this fully. I'm just going to provide one bit of background as a Brit. Obviously, The Guardian, I mean, I love The Guardian. You know, it's a great newspaper. I read it every day. I come in and open The Guardian. But of course, they're anti-market mechanisms for addressing climate change. I mean,
Oh, okay.
I feel like if you grew up reading The Guardian, it's just absolutely not a surprise. I mean, is the like level of their interest a surprise? Yeah, it probably is. But I wouldn't say it's that surprising, considering the angle they take on society in general and climate change in general. And then just my second point, I think, you know, when you said, oh, you know, the people you met with, they think it's all a fraud, like, it really, sorry to use the expression, it's extremely triggering. I mean, it is, because as we're and you know, we're not even on the ground. I'm in a nice office in Brighton, but when we go and visit these projects, or not even visit them, but have these like really deep connections with the projects we represent. To think that it's all fraud, you know, as if it's like smoke and mirrors and everyone's just pretending to do something. It's just the complete opposite of everything that we see, which is, as Josh was saying, like this huge range of stakeholders, community members, governments, like private sector. We'll go and see a project, there'll be so many people working away so hard, like so passionate about what they do, but like very, very tangible work that people are doing. And for it to be considered fraud as if it's all made up is, I mean, forget about it being insulting, but it's just completely baffling, honestly. But I will hand over to Josh to answer the question with
You
it.
can also be pissed off and angry about it. There's nothing wrong with
Yes,
that.
for sure. Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
I am very happy to let you preach. We've got a witness here, at least one. Yeah, I mean, look, you know, it's good to apply well-discerned human understanding to what's happening so that we understand what's happening, right? So we're deeply affected and moved, as Pamela is expressing, and that's, I'd say, even a polite expression of how we really feel in honesty, right? Because these are people we love. These are people we respect and esteem, who in a lot of cases put their lives on the line. So this is not like conference room, you know, spreadsheet, fantasy land. It's not. So really, you know, there's that element of it, and it's hard for us to dissociate from that a little bit, just because it really, it's like that. But I think it's what Pamela said. You know, there is a well-known wing of the you might call the environmental movement that has, for time out of mind, been utterly skeptical and ideologically opposed to the idea that you can do voluntary corporate action to make a difference on matters like climate change. You know, the idea that even more fundamentally, that the capitalist system, which got us into this mess in the first place, this is not my view, I'm just trying to express and channel the ideological rooting of the critiques. You can't solve the problem, which is born of capitalism, by using capitalism. You're just gonna get co-opted and make the problem worse. That's essentially like the concept here. And so there, in fact, is a you know, it's not just loose, it's a real network of, you know, journalists and quasi-journalists, researchers and quasi-researchers around the world who have been after this for the past few years. And it's been around for a long time. It's really been around since Red has been around. But the moment that it got material and started to get big, of course, it became a big fat target. And the whole concept has really been to make the thing stink to hell so that no company that cares about its brand value is going to go anywhere near a project like this, because some terrible article is going to be written that brings together their brand and a kind of laundry list of mischaracterized, factually inaccurate, you know, utterly devoid of context claims and charges that look horrible on paper, but, you know, rarely stand up to a fair-minded, balanced, honest, fact-based accounting of what's really going on. So that's what's actually happening. That's what's going on, and that's what the motivation is primarily, where it's born from. Is it fair? What are they actually saying, and is there anything to it? So I think there are kind of two classes. One of them is related to just like, this is all hot air. The climate impacts of this whole thing are utterly overstated. They're nothing like what people say. And what is the basis of them saying that? Remember earlier on in our conversation, we talked about this baseline, this business as usual scenario. So how do you make a carbon credit? How do you assess the performance of the project? Here's how much forest has actually been lost, but here's how much you said was going to be lost under this methodology that created the baseline. And so if your baseline if you say forest loss was going to be 8 billion tons and you're generating 100 tons, you're generating 8 billion carbon credits, right? If you goose that, if that's too high, you are overstating the impact of your work. And so the charge has been made, these projects are way overstating these baselines. So these business as usual scenarios are totally unrealistic and exaggerated to the point that this whole system is messed up. That's basically what's been said. And I can tell you, and this is where my nerd scientist is coming straight out, I'm going to tell you that that is totally wrong. And you don't need to believe it from me. Read the papers that we have published in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. We have hired a research team. We have collaborated with external independent scientists, and we have done our own analysis of these types of claims. We've done our own science that has made it through peer review and squarely addresses these criticisms. They have no basis. What is true is that these predictions of what forest loss would have been, like in some places, you're going to think it's higher than it probably would have been. In some cases, it's going to go the other way. When you look across the whole system of all the projects across the whole period of time over which they've been operating, what you find is the crediting, those predictions of baselines were so good. They were excellent. You could hardly have done better. No one could reasonably have done better. At a system level, REDD+ crediting has been extraordinarily robust. So those claims are utterly without merit.
Okay. Have you, so first we have to get Pamela to cancel her subscription to The Guardian. But before that, have you
Free.
ever engaged with the journalists that are going after REDD+ and say, hey, dude, you think we're full of shit? Come with us to look at these projects. Please check us out. Have you ever done that?
Robert, so there's so much history behind this. So before this all erupted, the same people that had been involved in the Guardian article and other offshoots of it were part of a group that over a year to 2 years before that big article came out, they were trying to advance similar kinds of work. And so we, in fact, did just what you're talking about. We arranged to have a conference call with a number of different project developers and community members. We presented, we tried so very hard, and we've continued to try, even as the Guardian people and others have come in. The thing that we have found is they truly don't want to listen.
Okay.
They don't take facts on that. We had a long engagement with an organization called Human Rights Watch, which was making all kinds of outrageous allegations about one of the projects that we support in Cambodia. Yeah. And we kept trying to get them to come to the field with the project staff and to go out and speak directly to community members together, to hold public meetings together, so that everyone was hearing the same thing in the same place at the same time. And not only did they refuse, but the way in which they refused, they tried to make it seem as though the project was attempting to avoid going out to the field to be with them. It was outrageous. The kind of dirty tricks that these journalists are pulling are unbelievable. The level of bias that I've seen, it's been horrible for me because, I'm a free press person. I also love The Guardian. Like, I trust the press. And this has been a very tough thing for me to go through personally, because I've tried myself personally. I have spent a lot of time with background conversations. In most cases, I won't do on the record conversations with the journalists because we don't trust them. And so I've had background, and I've just said, look, let's drop the pen. Let's have a human conversation here. I want you guys to understand something. But it doesn't work.
Human?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I feel the same with a program produced by the BBC that I grew up watching. I mean, it's on, I think it's Monday night. My parents every Monday tune in at 8 p.m, whatever it is, Like I believe, or I believed 100% of what they said. Like, and really, why would they lie? Like that was my feeling. It's produced by the BBC. It's all about things that are of like very public interest, particularly to the UK, and they would expose things that I don't know people were doing wrong or what. It's like a classic kind of public interest type program. It would never occur to me that anyone producing or directing one of those programs would have any bias. I thought it was pure public interest. And I don't entirely know, to be honest, but I mean, yeah, I guess it does make me completely rethink journalistic standards at the BBC. I mean, we're raised to think the BBC has such high standards, and it's such high standards of integrity, such high truth telling. And it is the whole experience over the last couple of years, which actually, to be honest, I'm not even that directly involved in, like much less so than Josh and the project developers and our strategic communications team. But as he says, like, we love these publications, we love free press. It's so important to have these journalists who are willing to go out on a limb and speak the truth. But equally, like, that's not what's happened. And it's so frustrating.
So it's very much about truth versus belief.
Yeah, and what's interesting about it to me, right? And this just probably makes me an outlier, but like, the story of the project is really fascinating. And so what I'm not talking about is the sort of like a simplified marketing story. What I'm talking about is like the dynamic of pragmatic change. So this kind of work is interesting because it's about actually doing real change in a real place. And it's a really complicated change dynamic where you're wading into the mess, including dealing with people that are that are like the perpetrators of the problem too. You have to deal with, like, you have to be part of that. And so the story of what actually happens and the challenges that you have to overcome to make that kind of progress in a real place is utterly fascinating. The paradoxes, the trade-offs, the complexity, it's fascinating stuff. It's unbelievable. So the real story is kind of it's very interesting, but it does involve, nuance. It's edgy as heck, but it's nuanced. And so I forever am kind of like baffled because that is so interesting. It makes for great journalistic fodder, but not for, it's not clickbait fodder. But I think that, so the truth is a very fascinating story. So that's always been baffling to me. But, Pamela mentioned something that's important, which is that, in light of our failure in a way to bring that real story to most of the journalists, and there are some exceptions, what we've had to do, on the other hand, is invest heavily in really, really strong strategic communications expertise. And that has been very effective for us as a company. Remember our, what we do, who we work for. We're trying to preserve the capacity of our project and their reputation so that they can sell their carbon credits and continue to do their fine work. And in that regard, we've had to take a much more aggressive approach in handling these kinds of, media issues, where we're going straight to general counsels of the relevant publications and things like that to ensure that they require themselves and of their staff to uphold proper standards of editorial integrity, including the editorial integrity policies of these publications. And because of that work, there are a lot of things that have not happened. You talk about business usual and these counterfactuals. There are a lot of things that, haven't happened or were nowhere near as bad because of that type of intervention, because we've just had to. We've had no choice but to get extremely aggressive. And it's not improper. It's just about tell the truth. And don't present a false and misleading narrative about what's going on out here. It's because that does cause harm and damage for real. And it's not like, harm and damage to, some wealthy fat cats. These are people who don't have options on the ground. They don't have other options. So that's the thing that drives me nuts about the campaigning journalists, because their theory of change is totally empty. The theory of change is like, raise criticisms, make it impossible for companies to act, you know, because of the reputational risk, company investment falls away, no money goes to the projects, and then what happens after that? Forest conservation doesn't deliver value, the alternatives are back in play, more forest loss. It's ridiculous.
It reminds me very much of I don't know if you, maybe Pamela saw it. There were hearings with Senator Levin about Goldman Sachs traders. And they were confronted that there was, this was during the CDO disaster and the whole financial crisis, that they found emails where the traders were basically packaging shitty bonds of mortgage-backed securities, knowing that they were garbage and worthless, but then, and they would tell each other, I sold some more of this garbage CDOs, and then they would ensure that it would fail. So basically, I'm selling you a car, I know the brakes don't work, and I ensure that you're going to have a crash. And Senator Levin asked Goldman Sachs traders, don't you have a problem with that? And they said, no, we're market makers. So it sounds like the journalists see themselves also as market makers and not in journalistic integrity. I'd like to move on now to the future of, where, because I know that you guys have been working on Vera has been backed up in complaints about Vera, and this also was in the news. I don't know if it's, just people being pissed off, but there have been complaints that the Vera process is a bit too slow, and you guys have been working on a new system, and I think you also mentioned to me that there's VM0048. I don't know what that means, but if you can kind of lay out the future of trying to come up with a quicker, better, more accurate, more robust, Guardian journalist proof methodology.
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on some of the issues and the challenges or in a couple of different spots in this conversation, and I think that like the takeaway is that for there to be a voluntary market, you need market infrastructure, and the market infrastructure that matters are the standards by which the carbon credits are generated. And I think it's fair to say that the standards have not really provided their most important function to the market, which is on the one hand to provide a shield of protection for the reputation of buyers so that they can act with full confidence that on the carbon accounting and on the social justice and economic equality and equitability side of things, this is good. This is solid. I can feel confident. So the standard has to do that for the buyers, and at the same time, create the right kinds of rules that favor and are in the interest of the people on the ground for whom the entire mechanism has been generated. And fundamentally, the issue that we have seen is that everyone creating the rules, all of this is from the perspective of what we might call the global north. And we're forgetting about designing a system to serve the needs of the change making that has to happen on the ground. And that is what motivated us, along with Wildlife Works, to invest in the development of a new standard called the Equitable Earth Standard. The whole idea behind the standard is really simple. Forest loss, as we've talked about, is categorically unique as a problem, right? Talking about life on Earth, we're talking about the carbon stocks. It's so critical. It doesn't make sense for us that this unique challenge is encapsulated in a much bigger generic carbon standard, the VCS. It merits its own attention. And the kinds of things that we've talked about, the need for really high quality co-design and partnership with communities based on legitimate, well-done, prior, informed, and ongoing consent. All of these elements that make a truly equitable and high-quality project on the ground are not spoken to in any of the existing standards. And that's one of the huge differences with Equitable Earth. it's really providing a whole new approach, a game-changing approach to that element, which is going to not only do incredible things for the communities on the ground, but give incredible assurance and transparency to the buyers. You did touch on an element that's really important, which is that market infrastructure needs to also be very service-oriented. You need to have, you know, market-facing service delivery, operational excellence. And I think it's no secret that, you know, Vera has had big challenges, and we don't want Vera not to be great. We want Vera to be amazing. And one of the things that tends to lift up lots of boats is having competition. And so another kind of motivation with Equitable Earth is to put into place an organization, an independent organization that really has systems, people, and processes. Anyone who's into corporate management consulting jargon, people, processes, and systems that are all set up for excellence in facing the two constituents that matter the most in the market, who are the suppliers and the buyers. And you need to have a really strong operational motif enabled by great technology, and that's been a whole element of the development of the standard. So yeah, we're really excited about it. We're excited about the new carbon methodology coming out with Vera, because we think that that's a big improvement on what's been out there so far. And I think it's going to go a long way to insulate the buyers from, and the system as a whole from, let's say, too much unwarranted critique. It certainly gives enough good science and data, and it's based on the right kinds of principles, that it really should defang. It's not going to stop these people from coming out and making criticisms, but I think the impact of the criticisms on buyers is going to be a lot less. So we feel really good that the enabling conditions in terms of the market infrastructure, they're coming into play now. You know, VM48 is coming in, you know, within the next couple of months, and Equitable Earth we expect to be operational over the course of this year. And you know, what's cool about that is, next year, 2025, this year coming up. And what's cool about all of that is, us, through all of this stuff, through all of the impact that this has had, the thing that's so amazing, and you know, we're like, it's unbelievable to us, we're so grateful, is that the companies that have made these time-bound, public-facing commitments, particularly those who have created nature-based solutions departments and who said, we're going to make long-term significant investments into REDD+, they haven't left. In fact, they've always been here, and they've continued to buy through all of this. And they're very smart people, extremely intelligent people with unbelievable technical expertise and the capacity to make up their own mind about questions of science and equitability and so forth. And we've been transacting with them. We just announced a $16 million transaction with Rio Tinto, a groundbreaking transaction to protect the Makira Natural Park REDD project, a huge 300,000+ hectare jewel of a rainforest national park in Madagascar. Unbelievable biodiversity, unbelievable community revenue sharing, incredible project, and a groundbreaking investment. We have many more things like that in the works. And so we've already begun to see a turning anyway of the market, and then underlying market that has been, let's say, not affected so much by all of this. So there's a foundation here for the regrowth and the reemergence of scaling. And we do anticipate that as the new standards come into place, 2025 is going to be a transition year. And we hope and believe that 2026 is when we're going to really see things begin to move up again, more soberly than maybe in the past, but with solid growth. And you know, just thinking about our company and how we're positioned, we're incredibly excited because we have, you know, a large number of exclusive sales and marketing appointments, representation agreements with some of the most amazing, unbelievable projects and project developers in the world. Wildlife Works, as we've talked about, they have an enormous portfolio of new projects under development in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America, the Wildlife Conservation Society, Fauna and Flora, Rainforest Alliance, an incredible organization called the Upper Amazon Conservancy in Peru that we're working with in a most incredible area of the Peruvian Amazon that's on a buffer zone of the last uncontacted tribes in Peru. The Diane Fossey Gorilla Foundation, so many unbelievable organizations, Wildlife Alliance doing incredible work, BirdLife. So we have a large number of projects that are getting ready to come in under these new standards and new methodologies over the course of the next year to 18 months. And so, you know, we're unbelievably well positioned as a company, but you know, the cool thing about that is, and you know, Robert, I know you're in the impact space, impact investing. Oftentimes, you know, like there's, I think about that, like the Ikigai diagram of, you know, the Japanese. You're kind of looking for this place right in the middle when you're talking about impact and investment. The sweet spot is where like every dollar that's coming in on the investment side is translating into transformative impact in reality. And I have to say, 30 years of this kind of work myself, this project, this company for me is the best expression I've ever seen, because our business model is 100% tethered to the impact model, 100%. So we're excited. Well, yes, as a commercial venture, but we're especially excited because we really see a legitimate opportunity to make a big dent in this big problem. And we're very privileged to be in a position to actually have the chance to do that and work with these unbelievable people and organizations around the world, including the companies whose, I have to say, courageous, utterly, completely voluntary choice to finance forest conservation is something that deserves praise, thanks, gratitude, acknowledgement, which I'm very happy to do right here now.
Pamela, do you think now that Trump, unless there's a recount, will be president, do you think that this is going to impact you positively or negatively, your business?
I do not think it will impact us negatively. I don't really know the US space well enough to say, oh, it will impact us positively. I guess why am I saying that it won't have that much of an impact? Because just instinctively, I feel like you know, when your levels of empathy, like when everything that you believe in is attacked, particularly if it's your profession and you feel as strongly about something that people in our world, at least I know they do, I feel like you double down on those beliefs. I know that I do, certainly. So I also equally think, like in the private sector, I mean, I don't really think people are looking to the government every day for guidance on what they should be doing. I mean, that's literally one of the reasons why the VCM, the voluntary carbon market, exists, because there isn't that strict guidance from the government. So if anything, I actually think it could possibly work in our favor, because you have all these people who are so motivated about something that they believe in so deeply, having it challenged by someone who they don't like. I mean, I don't know if that's okay to say, but yeah, I feel like it's probably fine to say. And they're in a position where they can actually double down on what they believe and do more of it. And hey, it's nothing to do with the government anyway. So I think that actually it will like really tap into those kind of empathy reserves that people in our space have, and it could end up working in our favor. But I mean, don't quote me on that. And well, I guess you are literally quoting me on that, but we can talk in a year.
Well, I'm personally, I don't think it's going to have any impact at all, because there is no group more predictable than the financial sector. There's just a bunch of alpha males who run up the hill and off the cliff at the same time. So as you know, that we have gone now to 1.7 trillion in fuel-free energy investment compared to 1 trillion in fossil fuel. That's a massive turnaround because it's a good investment. So I don't, I don't see
Right, the
money
ship
flow
sailed.
stopping because of that at all. I think it might even move, a bit faster than that. Um, the what are there's I've been because I've been in the space quite a while. I tend to prefer to work with irresponsible investors and criminals. Mainly, they have more money, a better sense of humor, and they're more pragmatic. So the unfortunately, a lot of the impact investors talk a lot but don't do very much. Um, so I've seen so many big institutions, intermediaries coming into the carbon market space. Does that help you or hurt you? Like a TCX, is that a positive for you in that it has a bigger distribution? Do they distribute your stuff, or is it just another distortion?
Well, the nuanced picture is this. First of all, we value all our clients a lot. So anybody who is buying on a purely voluntary basis a carbon credit from Red Plus is someone that we are very grateful for. The intermediate, as you know, the market intermediaries serve a really important function, right? They absorb risk, basically. They take on risk in the hope of earning a return. And this market, like any other market, can benefit a lot from the presence of intermediaries. At the same time, intermediaries can create distortions and problems in markets, and our market is no different, right? Ultimately, the real market, the actual market are the companies that are purchasing carbon credits in order to fulfill some form of self-imposed or other obligation that they put on themselves and against which they want to be able to make some form of a claim. So that's the ultimate market. So intermediaries are serving as some extra path length on the route to getting there. And so like intermediaries have had a hard time in the past couple of years because when the market ran up, things were good. And then when the bottom fell out, things were really bad. And so a lot of intermediary players have actually, if they haven't exited, they've paused their work in the space. But, you know, who sticks around, who's going to play different roles into the future, let's see. But like there's an important role to play, especially now is the most important time when intermediaries can be really valuable in a market, just in the nascent stages of a rebound of the market. It's a really important time. And, it's always like, well, you don't want to be too early and you don't want to be too late. This is about the time when if you really have your good finger on the pulse of the market, if you're a thoughtful intermediary investor, this is a really good time to start getting involved in the market, I think. And that sounds like it's emotional. And to some degree it is, but I think it's actually true.
That's fine. We've gone a bit over the time that I promised, but that's okay. The conversation was good. How can those who are listening, how can they help you?
I would say to anyone who wants to learn more about what we do, reach out to us. Like we love, as you as you have noticed, because we've gone so over, we love to talk about what we do. Add us on LinkedIn, reach out to us via you. We really like to talk about our story and most importantly about the projects we represent. If you're a company in particular looking at supporting a Red Plus project, reach out to us and we'll do what we do with every client, which is start at the very beginning from a very educational place. We won't move straight into the sale. We'll start with just helping you understand exactly what Red Plus is, as we've tried to do on this podcast, and what the options are for a potential buyer. So I would say if you're curious in any way, just reach out to us and we'll be really happy to speak to you.
Absolutely. And how can you help us? Since that's what you asked, I would say First, we're raising a little money. I think we're a pretty plucky group here. We've more or less bootstrapped. We've taken a bit of equity investment, as you know. But by and large, we've bootstrapped this business. And we've been able to do some thoughtful cost cutting and restructuring through this hard time. And I think that we've kind of found a plausible path to sell our way through our challenges here. But as I mentioned, this is a very good time to be doing some investing, and our company is really well positioned for the turn in business. And we need to make some leading investments so that as that turn happens, we're ready to service the business. And so we are raising equity up to $10 million, but that's a kind of an absolute cap. We'd be happy to talk to you about that. We are raising a little bit of money right now. And so we do have a capital raise going, as you know, Robert. And so for those who are interested in investing in the business, we'd love to have a conversation with you, of course. We've sold about $500+ million of carbon credits over the past 5 years. I think we're the largest primary seller of carbon credits in the world over this period of time, if I'm not mistaken, if not the largest, one of the largest. So I think, as I mentioned, we're a great impact investment, capital I, capital I.
And it's do you have a retail distribution potential? Because I would think a lot of retail customers who go through maybe a small asset manager or a bank that is offering them product. Have you ever structured these types of credits for the retail customer rather than these large institutional or corporate clients?
So we have, of course, as part, we exploit many channels to market for our projects, and we have provided credits into retail distribution channels in the past and continue to have opportunities to do that. And I won't rule out the possibility of that in the future. But just in terms of Pamela spoke quite a bit earlier on about the focus of our business. And one thing that's really important to note is that as people like to talk about, the tickets that we do with our clients are in orders of hundreds of thousands to millions of tons at a clip. That's our kind of a sweet spot, and there are very, very, very few companies in our space that know how to and are set up to work with the kinds of companies that do those sorts of tickets. And so our path to scale as a business is a lot different because of that. And so like I said, we'll look for more opportunities on the retail side. It's just, the path to getting to millions of tons of sales through retail is far less certain, and we've not really seen any retail focused businesses in our space really succeed wildly. On the other hand, there's always a possibility, and we do have a few ideas in that regard. And so, yeah, not rule it out, and let's see. But if you're thinking about investing in the business as it is and what's going to really fundamentally drive the growth in the business, it's something that's very unique, which is our market access to the biggest emitters in the world who see us as a trusted transaction partner.
Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of chatter and research around nature-based solutions, but mainly in liquid assets, in listed companies. How they're approaching nature-based solutions. So you have a large asset manager who are looking at that. But I'm thinking, those are not really, using nature-based solutions where I would think structuring a retail product which would give you the money to scale up the project, maybe not necessarily in private equity, but maybe in debt facility, and then you can sell those credits, and the money made on the credits can be paid back to the retail customer.
Yeah, we're open to that kind of conversation for sure. Probably at the moment that we're in right now, an equity play is a better play for us right now. I think at a slightly different moment, a debt instrument will be better for us when we're generating a little more cash flow. You know, it's a little lumpy right now. When another year from now will be a better fit for us for that kind of an instrument, I think.
Okay, so our big goals this year is an apology for the Guardian and all the other journalists, and that your new initiatives for carbon certification, Equitable Earth, is off and running, and you're doing many more projects around the world, and basically people realize that this is a no-brainer. It's hard work, and you'll have to put on your Indiana Jones boots, but I'm very impressed with what you guys have accomplished, basically also on a bootstrap initiative. So you're doing the heavy lifting, you're pulling the cart up the hill. Congratulations on that. And I'm quite confident that you guys are like little, Jack Russell Terriers. You just kind of bite into something and never give up. So congratulations on that. And thanks a lot for doing this. I appreciate it. Sam will process it and send it out probably the following week. And we'll give you access to, we'll share that link so you can also push it out. And good luck. Say hi to Gerald. And thanks you so much for your time. And keep the faith. I mean, it's farming, not hunting.
Yeah, for sure. No, appreciate your time. Thanks for the platform. Thanks for the conversation. And we're feeling pretty good, man. Honestly,
I sense that. I don't sense any desperation. I would probably be more angry with the journalists that are, putting oil slicks on the side of the hill while you're pulling that cart up the hill and then trying to pull you back down. That can be quite frustrating and irritating. That.
You know what
happened?
I'm sorry.
Your guitar player.
No, I was just going to say just the amount of time in responding to them is mind blowing. How much time it takes.
Someday I'll send you like our latest rebuttal to this thing that was going on in Bloomberg, 120 pages, because this little asshole. This is not making the podcast. This little asshole. I mean, just talk about slapping it on the wall. I mean, you just have no idea. I'll send it to you just so you can see.
Please send that to me.
It's really an unbelievable. But you know what? You ever play guitar, Robert?
No.
Do you play guitar?
I learned the violin because it was the lightest instrument at school to take home.
In the beginning, your fingers hurt a lot, but then you get calluses. We have calluses.
We're fine, totally. Whatever. We're fine.
Another article.
I didn't know about the Bloomberg story. I have to research that because I have family working there, so I'll ask them about that.
No, please don't ask them about that. But I'll send you what we got.
I'd love to see it.
Please don't, because it's an ongoing matter and we're dealing with it.
All right.
We have lawyers involved. So
no worries. Okay. Good luck to you.
Thanks so much. See you later. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye. Stay well.